Good evening. Welcome to the Laugh and Monkey Music Show. Angry Anderson. We are back to do records that matter. These are some great records that Angry's listened to and brought up that he likes.
I've got top of the list. I suppose I started with I suppose what I considered to be not only very influential on myself, but just influential per se with music. I mean, so the top of the list is Sgt. Pepper's now, which is very interesting because I've got a little arrow to one side, and there's John Wesley Harding and Blonde on Blonde in brackets. I don't know what's that got, if the thought pattern. I think it might have been an afterthought because there's no relationship to Sgt. Pepper's, apart from the fact that the Beatles were huge Bob Dylan fans. And then I've got Goat's Head Soup and Exile. I think Goat's Head Soup for me, I think one of the earliest impressions for me is when I took it home and put it on, and I had, by that stage, I had a fairly good stereo setup, was how sonically superior I thought it was to previous albums. I think 12 by 5 is like most people's albums in those days, very, not so much echoey, but roomy, had that wonderful sort of, rehearsal studio sort of quality about it,
feel.
And and I just thought the Goat's Head Soup to me was like, wow, the sounds were just so rich but then I've got Goat's Head Soup, Exile, and I think when I listen to Exile now, which I still do, I think the thing that strikes me about Exile, thinking about it, apart from there's a fantastic array of songs, like there's a wonderful smorgasbord, if you like, of all the things that the Stones do really well are on that, and plus the fact, it was one of the few double albums that I think that stood up. I think for Physical Graffiti, which I don't think is actually, I don't know why it's not here, but it's. I'm quickly looking down because, again, one of my favourite albums. But I think with Exile, I think it's a wonderful acknowledgement to their roots, and probably their best manifestation of their acknowledgement of American blues music. That without it, of course, there'd be no Rolling Stones. But the other thing that I realised listening to it in recent years, it's probably the best thing that they've done since Brian.
Yeah.
The inspiration song-wise, like things like Satisfaction and I don't know, Jumpin' Jack Flash. It's not some of the world's favourite Stones songs. Those early, when they first started to write their original stuff, it was largely Brian Jones with the ideas, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And they are still the magic riffs for if you're a Stones fan. And I think that's why, because I have to say, as a Stones fan, when they turned around and said, well, we're replaced, not that they replaced Brian Jones, but there's a chair at the table that's empty. And this young, very pretty Mick Taylor is chosen as, well, even back then I thought, well, fuck, there's Ronnie Wood, there's a bunch of, Jeff Beck even. There's a bunch of players that would probably suit the Stones better. Who was Mick Taylor? He was like a very young muso's muso, a bit like a young Peter Frampton. I mean, Frampton goes on to produce something as amazingly accessible as his solo stuff. And he starts out as playing second guitar to Steve Marriott in Humble Pie. I mean, for fuck's sake. I mean, that's a way to get a bloody, throw this pretty boy who is, it turns out that his original band was a band called The Herd, a terrible name for a band, but they were like a glam teenage sort of glam pop band.
Oh, really?
Sort of with, yeah, with a sort of bluesy sort of, like a lot of bands did coming out of England in that time, but they were sort of like a very, yeah, they were too pretty for words, you know, all hair and good looks and like very, very sort of, yeah. But anyway, and then all of a sudden he pops up as second guitar player to arguably one of the toughest guitar players in the world, and certainly one of the toughest singers that we've ever seen, Steve Marriott, and with this amazing rhythm section. And then you've got this pretty boy lightweight on the other side of the stage and say, righto, sport, hold up your end of the bargain, you know, and he did, to his credit. It's the same with Mick Taylor. I thought it was some of the stuff that they produced with Mick Taylor in the band. As I said, you know, Goat's Head and Exile were extraordinarily, to me, you know, I suppose I could have listened to more of what they produced in the ensuing years, and maybe I've just been a little bit too dismissive. But
do you think, on that subject, you being in your own bands and over the years from band members, have you had a member come in where the public on the outside goes, what? But you know that person has that talent, the drive in them to help work with band, and that fits the puzzle, even though no one else knows, but you know. Like those bands did when they brought those guys, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah.
Everyone's like, what is Angry thinking? You know what I mean? And it's real.
Yeah.
I know what I'm thinking, because you're not part of this. It's not just the breathing 5-person, 10-arm living creature. Is more than one of its parts. That cog has got to work, otherwise the machine crashes. You know.
Yeah, I think one of the, yes, I agree totally, and I'm a little bit more comfortable these days with, well, apart from the fact that I'm the only surviving member from the first lineup, well, the first two lineups, but in the first two lineups there was only, you know, one change, which was Rylands was the bass player originally.
There will be a nuclear war, and the only survivor will be Angry Anderson. You will be the final survivor of every game.
It'll be Keith and I. We'll do a duo. I'm a little bit more comfortable with the role and the contribution that I've made, and so I'm a bit more comfortable about that. One of the things that I think, and getting back to the what was I thinking, that came up a couple of times in recent times doing interviews, particularly with England and Europe, about, you know, the re-emergence, well, the emergence of my new band, blah blah blah.
Exactly.
One a bloke from America said to me, "Wow, apart from yourself, this is like come out of left field. This doesn't sound like you at all." I said, "Well, it sounds just like me, like voice-wise." I was just being, you know, a little bit. I said, "Well, yeah, it sounds just like me. That is me, you know." Like, and he said, "Well, no, the music sort of side of it." I said, "Well, yeah." I said, because it didn't really, what I'm about to say didn't resonate as strongly in America, anywhere near as strongly as it did through Europe. I said, "This is a person whose biggest hit is a song called Suddenly. Suddenly I'm suddenly just the way I am."
This sounds more like you than Suddenly sounds like you.
Yeah, well, he didn't get it because he wasn't familiar with the history of Suddenly. But and then I realised, oh, that's not a great comparison or analogy, whichever the appropriate word. But
I think it's a good comparison. If they know your music, if they're talking to you, they should know a few. It's pretty easy to hit a couple hot points on that.
Yeah, well, he was young and very energetic, very enthusiastic as a fan. He said, "Oh, you know, I've got to say that I discovered Rose Tattoo through my father's and mother's record collection." And but we were talking about the AA band. But yeah, you know, it's like all the negativity that was around the release of Suddenly that I was supposed to feel or suffer from, like, what were you thinking? I said, well, I wasn't thinking of any. I mean, I was thinking about writing music. I mean,
Right.
the producer said, who's an American producer who produced that album, and he said, we just need a couple of songs for the women, for the ladies. And I said, well, I've never, not written about the sisters. I mean, but in Tats I don't, but because it's a boys band. But like, there's a track on that same album which was written. I read the book of Winnie Mandela, and so I wrote it from her point of view, and I think it's a beautiful song.
I was listening to that. Actually, I was listening to that album tonight on my way home from work.
Get away! See,
I have a playlist of different. I have a Rose Tattoo playlist. I have you do singles, and I have a playlist of all different types of music. And I was like,
again, this person was not aware of that album.
But that album is probably your most left turn in a good way, because it shows a different vocal range for you and a different style, sort of, than the Tats.
Yeah.
And this actually is more of a in between, even more of a 70s feel. This new album, as we were talking about previous, this is really an earthy, rootsy, well produced rock.
Funk.
There's grit in your voice to it. You know what I mean? Whereas the other part, it's a different range in your voice. But so that's the whole point I'm saying with these other things. It's like you don't know, and that's why, to me, as an outsider, I kind of wonder, like, you always have your favorite parts, but you don't know what's going on with what's on Mick, or Mick Taylor, or maybe he's like, you know what, you're not gonna be the only Mick in the band. We're gonna just lighten you down.
Yeah, well, that's I think one of the attractions, and I don't want to get too far away from the list, because now that I look at it, there's some interesting. The reason I picked these albums, even though there's more than 10, quite predictably, is just because of that. It's like I've got straight under Exile, like as I've just said. I think they really. They came back to being very original and innovative, as far as if they, supposedly they never recorded another album after that. That's just so, to me, when I want to hear the Stones, I go back to the early stuff, and that's just typical of someone my age and the era. But it doesn't say that what they produced in recent times isn't musically valuable. I mean, there's a song here and a song there, and they're not usually the singles. I mean, I've been to a Stones concert and I've seen the reaction of "Start Me Up," but I just think, really, compared to "Sympathy for the Devil" or like "Give Me Shelter," one of the greatest rock songs, I think, just extraordinary as a song, anyway, moving on. I don't know if you want to move on this quickly, but right under that, of course, I've got Are You Experience, which was I think we talked about this. The first time I heard Jimi Hendrix was on the radio, but it was coming out of England, because he was living in England. And I think I told you the story, didn't I? Where I went and saw Eric Burdon and the Animals, and they came out to play a 3-song encore. He said, "We're going to play a tune now." I don't think it was the Animals. I think it was Eric Burdon Band. More to the point, I think. And he said, "We're going to play a song from a bloke who's living in England now, and we're all hanging around together, and we're drinking and we're playing music together." And he said, "This is his new single. We want to play it." And they played "Hey Joe." And Eric did say that it was a tune that Hendrix covered. But he said, you'll come to know this guy because he's an extraordinary guitar player and a great singer. But we're going to play this song for you. And they played "Hey Joe." And they played it really, really, and I fell in love with the song. I thought, fuck me, what a beautiful song. And great song. It's beautiful, but it's just so powerful. Like, I went down to shoot my old lady. you know, yeah, baby, you know. But not
It's
you know what I mean?
it's a very emotive song too. There's a lot of
it's just
songs
tough.
to just kind
It's
of go.
tough as it's tough as all fuck, you know. I mean, that was the first time I'd have heard anyone sing such a blatant lyric. I caught him messing around. With another guy. I go, shut
The
up.
blues.
I put it
The
down.
blues.
You go, fucker, what? You did what? I mean, you know, like no one had said that in a song before. You know, what are you doing with that gun in your hand? What? You think about the era. No one had said anything lyrically like that, and the song had been written years and years before. You know, and those black people that we were talking about my earliest influences, they were singing songs about, but they weren't quite that blatant. I mean, yes, they talked about, you know, I remember one song, I can't remember who it said, but he was talking about cut some guy up with a razor or a knife, but I think it was a razor. I think he mentions razor. Great word, you know, razor, you know. And I thought, you know, that's pretty sort of heavy duty, but it was in the context of a blues singer sitting on a stool.
Well, I think a lot of the blues songs had a lot more grit in them that were
they
were commercial. They had their own underground following, so they were a lot more uncensored.
Yeah. So, Are You Experienced, that collection of songs? It just, to me, I was so moved by.
What's your favorite song on it? Don't overthink it.
Wind Cries Mary.
I gotta say Fire is mine.
Oh yeah, but yes.
It's so manic. It gets so manic.
I get all that. I was about to say the opening notes of Hey Joe, the first time I heard Hendrix version was sometime after Burden had introduced it at this concert in Melbourne, live concert. And then I heard it. He said, it's going to be played now. It's coming out as a single, like, you know. So glued to the radio for weeks. And all of a sudden, this is by a new band called the Jimi Hendrix Experience. And here it goes. You know, it's a bit like, you know, because DJ spoke like that. And I just heard the opening notes and I hadn't even heard his voice yet. And I was practically, if not reduced to tears. I just thought, my Godfather. And it was kind of like, even though that you weren't waiting for this, because there was no waiting for something you'd never experienced before. I've experienced. Classic name for an album. But I'd never heard a guitar like that before.
His tone, right out of the gate, he had a great tone.
Unbelievable. And just to hear those opening notes, and then you're like, hey, Joe. And it's just like, oh, thank God. You know, I mean, thank God. Like, yes. I mean, I realized that there was this whole other area to music, which none of us had been experienced. And so Are You Experienced? I mean, it's such a beautiful, and to have followed him so passionately.
It's really like a greatest hits album. Foxy Lady, Manic Depression, classic Red House, you know, it opened a lot of doors.
The reason I love Wind Cries Mary, and I just plucked that because when Hendrix played Foxy Lady, that was like, that's that end, that's extreme. You know, it was like, that's as loud, that's as big, that's as butch as you want to go, right? That was just and then, you know, he plays these, like in some of the softer stuff. And the wind whispers, Mary. It's the way he delivers the words, but it's the guitar is just the most gentle, ethereal. It's just, you go, I've been waiting for a guitar to take me there. You know what I mean? Without knowing that there was that there existed to go there. But when he took you there, you realize, yes. Like, and right under that, I've got Dark Side of the Moon, and that's the two are almost for me, because I think Gilmour is one of the greatest exponents of it's a person and a Telecaster.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, I know that he's used other guitars,
Right, but that's his thing.
but he as Hendrix did, he showed up until then the Telecaster was the Shadows, was the surf music was sort of the toughest thing that we'd heard,
rockabilly type of feeling.
Yep. Yeah, and it was, you just think, okay, it's Stratocaster, beautiful instrument. But Hendrix took it. He said, no, there's more to this. I can get the dragon to come out of this fucking beautiful looking, because I mean it's aesthetically beautiful, Stratocaster, I'd say. And so yeah, I mean, and the same with Gilmour. I don't think there's anybody. I mean, there's some really significant guitar players like Ritchie Blackmore. I mean, Hendrix is the top of the list, Gilmour, and a few others. I remember years ago being on tour in America, and we did a show with Robin Trower.
Oh, nice.
And he was playing a powder blue Stratocaster, and he was fucking amazing. I mean, he was the couple of nights that I watched him play, I was awestruck by how beautiful he plays. Is he still around?
Yeah, he's still
talking. Oh yeah.
So that's what's interesting. So like a real question is, so Hendrix and actually Dark Side of the Moon albums are in the same time, but Hendrix died young and he blasted out. But the question is, and this people couldn't argue about it, I don't really care. Do you think he would have maintained? Yeah, I know. The level of who he was, would he have continued on, or would he? Because look how Jeff Beck came out. Everything blow by blow. No one could touch Jeff Beck for a while. Now he still plays, and he's the artist. Yeah, but he's not selling out places. He's not the same person to the world because he's still alive. When you die, it changes. All of a sudden, you're
Oh, absolutely.
The question is, what would have happened? Because some of the Hendrix outtakes, some of the extra albums they've dug up, they're fine, but it's not the same. Now, was that the songs he was going to do? Is it fair to take a musician's unfinished work that they were like, you know what? I don't want to put it out because this is not where I'm at. So you don't really know where he was going to go. What would have happened? Would he have continued on and been like an Eddie Van Halen, like continually be in the public eye, loved, or would he have kind of been more of a cult player?
It's a romantic view, which we're both prone to. I think he would have waxed and waned. I think that, for a few years he would just like play clubs or possibly clubs, because I think he's a player. I mean, I believe in my heart that he was a classic player, right? So he would always be playing. I think every now and again he possibly, because we'll never know, this is all speculation, every now and again he would do something that would just like people would go fucking. I don't think he ever would have wandered too far away from his roots, and I think so.
No, I don't either.
I think he always would have been a blues R&B sort of player. And when I've said R&B to a few others, they've gone, "You think he was R?" I said, I can hear his R&B, and it's not just because of who he played with as a guitar player in whose bands, because he played in a couple of bands, and if you listen to the music, I'm just trying to think of the one that he's most famous for. Famous R&B singer, and Hendrix played in his band.
Oh, I'm escaping me right now. I know you're talking now.
Yeah. Oh, it's maddening, but that happens with age.
He served his musical time by playing with the greats before he even came known. He knew everything before he even did it. Yeah,
and I think he would have stayed true to his roots. That's the first thing. I think he would have. I think he was so gifted. I think that he would have he would have been productive, not necessarily. And I think that the analogy or the comparison to Beck is spot on. And we've talked about those albums, I think, but some of my favourite Rod Stewart material.
We have Jeff Beck
when he was with the Beck Band. So,
and Mick Jagger's first solo album, I love that one. Jeff Beck plays guitar on that Mick Jagger's first solo album.
Well, go back to the Yardbirds. He proved that he can play blues, rock and roll, traditionally, guts, ragged sounds, ragged style. Because he's a man for all seasons, so to speak. I mean, he can, when he's playing jazz, and there's a mate of mine who's a music aficionado, and he's got like this just fucking seemingly limitless collection of the most amazing albums, like that Paco guy, the bass player and saxophone players you've never heard. And listen to this, and he puts it on. He only plays vinyl, and he puts it on, and you sit back, and he's got the sound system that like can create earthquakes, and it's kind of like, and it's the purity of sound that he strives for. He's always chasing his tail in this. He's an amazing guy. Plays bass in one of Australia's best bands, Mondo Rock, a band called Mondo Rock. And he's introduced me to some sounds and some music. But when Beck plays with these jazz musicians, and he's playing that wonderful picking style that he has, he just fits straight in. He's
fit his own style, but he's never cracked the commercial world. You know what I mean? Like, which is fine because you don't have to.
But it's like it's kind of that weather report sort of, jazz. It's like fusion sort of. It's like it's musically it doesn't do much for me, but I can appreciate how beautiful it's put together, and the playing is just like, oh my God, Father, it doesn't turn me on. It doesn't sort of ring my bell because, I'm sort of, still blood and guts, that's the thing. And yet that brings me to my next one on the list, Out of Dark Side of the Moon, which I think it's just typical of one of the most extraordinary, innovative lineups in music ever. Was the original Pink Floyd, and that's with Barrett. But even after he left, they still denied and defied their critics to go on to produce music that's, I think, and I mean, I've heard people say, I've even read it in print in books about the Syd Barrett book, and also a book about the Floyd. Oh, they never did anything as good as when they did with it. Rubbish. They did monumental stuff after he left. I mean, it was tragic. They all said it was tragic that he left. But to say that they didn't produce anything that was, worthwhile, it's just like, no.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, I'm reading a book, actually, one of the books in the middle of is a Pink Floyd book. And just going from Saucerful and doing Metal, those albums and who they were and how they started, and then all of a sudden coming up with like Dark Side of the Moon and going that way is a huge transition. You're like, whoa, and Dark Side of the Moon is like a perfect album, literally.
Well, that's a point. And one of the things that emerged, and of course is recognised undeniably. I mean, I know that Roger, the bass player, Roger Waters, he's huge influence on, when you read the books, and even then when you relate that to listening to the music, huge influence on that, the tempos and the mix, the layering of the music, huge influence on it. And of course lyrically, when you read a book about them, or a couple of books that I've read about them, lyrically, so there's no doubt in my mind that he was as they all were, I mean, all are integral parts of this wonderful musical experience. But what, like, and it no more manifests, and it manifests itself quite obviously in his legendary epic solos. Gilmour was just able to, like Hendrix did, and like Ritchie Blackmore does, and like other guitar players, who they chose an instrument and they said, well, I am going to get the best out. It's like Angus with an SG. Why does he play an SG? There's very fundamental reasons why he plays an SG, because it's his sound.
It is.
It's why Malcolm played a Hofner or a Gresh, more in recent times, of course. But it was they looked at different instruments and different configurations of amplification and effects, etc., to get their sound. And I think there's no better exponent of playing a Stratocaster than Gilmour. He's just extraordinary. But anyway, getting on, because we'll get through.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, after Dark Side of the Moon, I've got Can't Buy a Thrill. Now, I don't know about the thought pattern that led me to put these down, but I remember it was summer. I was in Melbourne. The guy that I was sharing a place with, who gave me the nickname Angry, a guy called Mangy Mick Malusak, and he was great. He had a great record collection. Frustrated guitar player, not a bad guitar player, just not a good one. But anyway, he brought home. He said, "All right, come on, man, quick, got some fresh buds." Rolled up a couple of big fat ones, and he said, "We're going to put on Can't Buy a Thrill." And I just thought, laying there, stoned off my gourd for a start, but just thought, that is just sensational. I just thought it was just, and anything that those guys came up with was,
it is, they're so perfect. When I first heard them when I was younger, I'm like, all right. But as I've gotten older now, I have all their albums. I can, as an older man, I can kind of sit back and listen to it, because I like fast and aggressive. But sitting back and listening to it now as an adult, they're flawless. And once again, all of them.
Yeah. And beautifully played, beautifully produced, the arrangements. I mean, but see, the reputation that they enjoyed in the early days was like, well, who are these people? And it was hard. Well, not hard, but it was not mainstream. It was not like when you brought out a band in those days, you saturated all the media with photographs, staged, perhaps, like standing there with the guitars, or like there's the Beatles, the Kinks, the Rolling Stones, the list goes on. Steely Dan. Fantastic name.
I know.
Love the way it's spelt. Who are these guys? I just, I was struck then, and I was just, I suppose, because that's what we did in those days. We got stoned and we listened to records, and what it did with a decent system, and you've got a head full of smoke, it allowed you to go in to the music and hear what there was to hear. Because chronologically, it's not in order of, but like the first time I ever heard Abraxas, but this is skipping ahead a little bit, but that was an extraordinary experience too, because of how they layered. And there was, up until then, there was never really an album or an artist, a band that actually explored percussion.
I was going to say the same, that the percussion albums, that's probably the first time, the most commercial that kind of percussion was ever out there.
The main thing that we knew about Steely Dan was they were this new concept. They were a studio band. And so the fact that they did, like, the fact now that I can watch live performances of them, I've got to say too, a lot of the live stuff that I've seen on the Google Tube is in Europe. They're huge in Europe, absolutely huge. And yeah, it was I mean, they were beautiful players live. They were terrific. It's like the band. I mean, the band were high profile.
Well, yeah,
And, I think, the association with Dylan, I think they would have been a big band anyway,
I think so too.
because they were just too good, just too good. But so anyway, moving down the list, after Can't Buy a Thrill, another left turn. I got Mad Dogs and Englishmen, and then straight underneath that is band Morrison. But Mad Dogs and Englishmen was, I mean, there's several live albums. I mean, the band itself was extraordinary.
Right.
I mean, it was a huge album here. Huge. I mean, to the point where, up until a few years ago, there was an amazing cover band that did the album, and the band is a derivative of Mad Dogs and Englishmen, and they were a concept, what we call here a concept band. So they're modelled on another band.
Right.
So they not only try to find lookalike people, if they're lucky enough to do that.
That way, if you've been really drinking or you're really high, you're like far back enough, you're like, you think you're watching the band.
Yeah. Squint your eyes.
Get close, you're like, oh, it's like, last call, the lights are on, you're like, oh.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, obviously, they are one of the, well, he's an artist that was pretty much discovered by Woodstock. But I think he would have gone on to do big things anyway, because he was just too talented. But I think after seeing the doco and reading the book, what an extraordinary experience! I mean, like just one of the greatest rock and roll stories of all time. If not, I mean, it's just an extraordinary rock and roll story. That produced one of
Joe Cocker and Van Morrison at the same time. A little similar too.
Ooh, that would have been scary. One of the, and I appreciated it at the time, not as much as I do now, but I remember seeing a doco on Leon Russell, and he was sitting at this piano and he was talking about stuff. And what an extraordinary, I mean, it largely was his sort of vision, energy. And he was very much, when you read the book, he was very much in control. Like,
oh yeah,
if you can be in control of chaos. But he was smart enough to allow the eccentricity, which became, I mean, you see some of the performances, the live performances, and they're just extraordinary. They're just inspirational. Just,
a lot of talent.
Jesus, what a stage full of fucking talent. I mean, the rhythm section was just like, fuck me dead.
The odds of that many people having that much talent being together. I mean, Leon on his own, even his solo stuff,
yeah,
he's fantastic. I have one of his albums, I think it's Carnival, song Tightrope. It's like the album is so good. And that's just one piece. That's one slice of the band.
Yeah. Yeah, but the sum of all parts, I mean, extraordinary. And from what I've read, he was a large part, Leon was a large part of that whole thing. He sort of pretty much made that happen.
Yeah.
It's just, and, if the romantic story was that he put the band together to bail Cocker out of debt or some sort of romantic story. And I just thought, like, well, whatever, it produced this extraordinary musical experience. And then, of course, in my list, I go into a brief hiatus, if you like, of I got Van Morrison, and anything, anything that Van Morrison did after them. I mean, them obviously was such an influential record.
Right.
Baby Please Don't Go, but and for some reason I've got an arrow pointing towards, among others, Odetta. And for some reason, I've always thought there was, she did one of my earliest albums that I ever bought. Was an Odetta album,
Mm-hmm.
and she sang on that album. It's one of her classic early albums, but she sang a couple of really religiously motivated songs, and there's a wonderful song. And I think the title is Long Chain, or He Had a Long Chain On, and about this guy who wanders around dragging this chain. He had
I'm actually not familiar with that song. I'll have to check it out.
Oh, it's fantastic lyric wise, but there's things like if I had a hammer most people identify that song with Peter, Paul and Mary, but because they popularized it, but they had a huge hit worldwide. But Odetta was the one, and for some reason, I've always thought I haven't read an awful lot about Van Morrison, which is strange because there's a couple of books out about him, but I've always thought that I felt more an influence of Odetta in Morrison as a singer. I don't know why. Maybe it's because she was such an influence on me. Then I move into Hotel California, then Abraxas, and an arrow pointing towards Caravanserai. So that was that 70s. Can't Buy a Thrill, Mad Dogs, Van Morrison, Hotel California, Abraxas, into Caravans. So, I mean, Abraxas was the first thing, I think. No, it might have been just Santana with the black and white pen drawing.
It was black and white, because I think I have that one. The Black Magic Woman. And,
yeah, the lion head. Abraxas was the second album. With Samba Pattie, which is one of my favourite songs. It always moves me to tears. Reminds me of my girlfriend of the time.
So many emotional songs for you.
It's ridiculous. Like I'm
big
alone
box of
here.
tissues to sit down with you. Listen to some albums. Got a big box of clinics between us.
Well, mate, sometimes when I'm, if like it's the atmosphere's right, like it might be raining or might be just sort of nostalgic time, but I purposely go and put on stuff that makes me sad, So I'm having a beer and a bourbon, and I just put on this endless stream of songs, and I sit there and I fucked that up. It was always some relationship that
Oh my God, it's record therapy.
Yeah, it's just yeah. And then when I go through my Santana period, I come to Caravanserai, and I'll just lay back and just everything gets put back good. It's like such a beautiful, beautiful album. And then I come out of Caravanserai sticking to the list, and I go back then, in retrospect, I go back to Cream and Blind Faith, and I've got Machine Head.
Yep,
again,
those are great.
Hearing what a metal stroke heavy rock band can do that I don't think has been done better, probably as well.
Yep.
But Machine Head was like, fuck me, And I told you about touring with Ritchie. I mean, I watched on those couple of tours that we did with Rainbow. I made sure I watched every gig, drunk, sober, indifferent, whatever. But I was side of stage and watched him play some stuff that he did with that guitar. It's just I'm sure he levitated, Sean. I am sure that there were some moments when I looked through my blurred vision, like, he's not on the ground. And then, from Machine Head, I look back a little, at the Cream albums, etc. And I fell in love during that time, an endearing love affair with Leslie West, which I still enjoy to this day. If I want to feel good, if I ever feel, and in the past few years, I've had cause to have some pretty blue moments, but if I want to feel good, I put Leslie West on, man. He just fucking brings me back.
That's the best part. That's the gift of it.
Yeah. I mean, I was listening to the other day. I was home on my own and I was cleaning my room and stuff, and I got a pretty meaty system in my room, and it's a song. One of the things that we've talked about here, which are some of the great live performances of all time. So Mad Dogs and Englishmen to me is one of the greatest live recordings I've ever experienced.
There's a lot going on in that album.
Oh, it's just
a lot of artists on that album.
Fucking Humble Pie live at the Fillmore. But I think one of the greatest is Nantucket Sleighride.
Mm-hmm.
Leslie West. I think that album, and it's got Long Red on one side. I think it's got Crossroads. There's 3 tracks on one side, and then the other side, which is about the best part of 15 minutes, is just
I think 25 minutes or something. It's crazy.
Nantucket Sleighride, and that to me, even sonically recorded live, it's just most powerful, emotive, emotional piece of music. I mean, once I had it, and it was very early on in the piece that I came across an interview, and Papalati said, I said, what, Nantucket Sleighride? He said, well, that's, when they go out of Nantucket to hunt whales, once they've speared the whale, and then they've got to tire it, the boat gets dragged along behind the whale. And every time it sounds, you just play out more rope and hope that it doesn't run out of rope and pull the boat under. And that's how they lost a lot of crewmen on whaling boats. The ones they rowed out there. And that's what a Nantucket Sleighride is. And then and of course, then you realise about, how beautifully the lyrics are,
mm-hmm.
Which I think Papalati's wife had a lot to do with. But they're very beautifully, very poetic lyrics, but the song itself, the musical ride, the piece is that.
It's a journey. Yeah, it goes back.
You once you understand what the song's about,
which I didn't. So listening to it now, let's go back and listen to it now with fresh perspective.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, wow. I've told you something.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I've learned a few things, but the thing is, I didn't know that. I know the song, I knew the album, and familiar with the lyrics, but I couldn't pull them out of the head because, but I wasn't aware of the actual meaning.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you another, and I don't know that there was I don't know that there wasn't an influence, because I've had inspiration from reading books, but in recent years, they made a wonderful movie with Heath Ledger, I think, played the part, and it's not called Moby Dick, but it's about the story of and how Moby Dick came to be written. But I remember the old story, the old film of Moby Dick, the White Whale. And, there's the Indian the harpoonist, Pegweg, I think his name is. He doesn't speak. And in Nantucket, they talk to the black man sleeping his watch away. There's a couple of references which kind of, even obscure, may relate back to that wonderful tale of it's many things. I think it's like man's struggle with the elements, his own identity, those kind of things. But it's a wonderful, wonderful story. The Moby Dick story. I will
probably go back tonight, tomorrow, and to reanalyze it, take it apart.
But there's one. It's on Netflix, or was a while ago. The one I'm talking about. It's a modern adaptation of the same thing about a rogue whale. Anyway, we digress again. So,
the only one I have left that I don't remember you saying was Vanilla Fudge, self-titled.
Oh, yeah, man. I mean, see, this is where, chronologically speaking, I got a bit out of, because after Live at the Fillmore, I've got that little, because it was obviously an afterthought. Now, I'm sitting here trying to think up a worthwhile list to not just impress you, but to interest you. And I thought, now, wait a minute, going back, 3 of the albums, which, and I found this the other day. I remember the last time we spoke about the missing album, Rock and Roll.
Yeah.
And I found it, and I've downloaded it onto my iPad. I found it in its original form.
Really?
But yeah, it been a reproduce. But yeah, Rock and Roll with the Fudge, but anything the Fudge did. And I mean, let's face it, in that era, and it's such a beautifully, some people might say it was a bit kitsch or a bit sort of, but during the Vanilla Fudge. You know what I mean? Like, really? That's such a fantastic name for a band that came out in that era.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, the Young Rascals, kind of, that's a bit sort of middle class sort of. There's nothing wrong with that, you know what I mean? But like the Young Rascals is kind of like, but Vanilla Fudge, that's, remember when it was like Clockwork Orange and
definitely is a timestamp of the time. Like, I don't even think, the other band, the Rascals, would be further back, because I'm like, there's already a show like that. There's already, the Little Rascals,
Yeah.
So to me, it's further back, but like Vanilla Fudge really is a timestamp of those years of what people were doing going on back then, where it was like,
monumental. I think there were a lot of bands, and I'm not being critical of this, but they were trying to have names that were psychedelic, because it was the psychedelic, the era
Strawberry Alarm Clock
of psychedelica. Well, I mean, Buffalo Springfield. I mean, okay, there's a bit more depth in that, but that's like, oh, Buffalo Springfield. What the fuck does that mean? You know what? That doesn't have to mean anything, really. It's grabbed your attention, so it's sort of,
right.
Like a band like Blind Faith. There's nothing psychedelic. It's just I have Blind Faith. I have. And that, I think that's why they call it.
Which is a great, I love that album. I mean, it's fantastic. Clapton was just going from band to solo to Derek and Dominoes to Blind Faith to Cream to, he was just bouncing around.
Yeah, well, see, that's
he was almost in the Beatles for one thing. If you just watch the documentary, they were talking about bringing him in with George, but they're like, well, we'll call Clapton today or something, whatever it was. It's in the second one.
There's a movie, and I don't know that they haven't, but that classic, and it's almost like a Romeo and Juliet sort of scenario. Here's 2 guys that love one another as people, love one another as players, and this tragedy, this amazingly Shakespearean tragedy befalls the three of them, right? So George is besottedly, totally in love with this woman. And his best friend secretly becomes obsessed with her.
Yeah.
And then realizes he has to make the decision because he knows he's going to lose George's friendship. They could have done something together musically, which would have been extraordinary if they'd have formed a band or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and he's an extraordinary songwriter with an extraordinary partner as one of the best modern exponents of playing, you know, blues guitar. Yeah, and you know, he falls in love with his wife, and they can't deny their love. So they have to go to this beautiful man and break his heart for the sake of love. I mean, that's Shakespearean. And it's what a great movie. Someone's got to make that movie.
It does, but you know what? You never do it to a bro. It's just no well strong enough. You just don't do that.
Okay, I get it.
This is hard. Like you just can't. You can't.
I get it.
Stop.
I get it. Yeah, I mean,
but I agree with you. I couldn't do it. I would be like, when I think of that story, the to be that forgiving and going on the power that is incredible. She's actually in it too in the movie for 2 seconds. Pattie shows up in it. The new Beatles movie. The documentary is out. Get Back.
Really?
George is in it. It's really good. You really get some good perspective on the songwriting process. And George actually getting upset, kind of pushing back a little bit, saying, "You want me to be on it? You want me to play on it? I will. I won't." You know, talk about playing his solo album because he had his songs that he'd written to ended up going off into his, you know, his past album. It was a really interesting time for all those guys. And it's in the documentary. It's really kind of neat to get a little different perspective on the relationships. You know, those guys.
Yeah. What do you think? This is left the centre. What do you think about the Paul McCartney conspiracy? You got a take on that?
Which one?
Well, is it, you know, did he die in a car? Did they replace him with a lookalike? No? No. Okay, cool.
Way.
just asking.
The documentary and see how he takes control because the manager had just died. Now someone had to lead the group. You know, you do need a strong leader. You know that. You need a leader. And push-pull, like Floyd, you need to have either a strong leader or a push-pull in a band.
Yeah.
Every successful band has a formula.
Yeah.
So he kind of took over. Exactly. But the fact that he still produces music, he just had an album out and just now, you know what I'm saying? He's still that songwriter. If he stopped writing songs, you could be like, well, I don't know. If he stopped writing songs, still doing it at that level.
Yeah.
No one can touch that, you know.
Well, look how long Wings produced and toured. Monumental sales.
Yeah.
Probably even to rival in some cases. I mean, the Beatles in numbers, not that it's, but, you know, I don't think McCartney has ever been about numbers, and maybe that's romantically what I want to believe and see, in the same way as, you know, I think, you know, really replaced him with a lookalike. So how do you say, well, you find a lookalike who's just as musically talented? I mean, because one of the things that I've loved about Paul was that, and John too, because I've got everything that John, the Beatles, Paul, George, and Ringo produced. No, I don't have all of Ringo's albums. I'll remedy that at some stage. It's just so that I've got the complete collection. It's not because I think that he's the most forgettable. I just, in all honesty, I don't think he's produced anything musically that's been as clever or as innovative as, you know, All Things Must Pass, or anything.
Look at the band he was in. I mean, look at the band he was in. I mean, God.
Yeah.
I mean, band, you know.
Yeah. But, you know, like, you know, I've listened to, I was going to say The Highwayman. That's another favourite album of mine. But, him and Pattie and George and Pattie and Dylan for a while, Jeff Lynne.
Traveling Wilburys.
Traveling Wilburys, yeah. I mean, beautiful fucking music. Just and beautifully made albums, beautifully sonic, really just beautiful.
What a great collection of voices together that really
yeah. It was just it's like there's a whole lot of footage now that's come out on Facefast or Google Tube, one or the other, about the history of talking about a collection of great voices. Yeah. There's a lot of interviews about the Crosby, Stills and Nash Young. Again, when the four of them were together, it was just like, sublime. Magic. When the three of them were together, pardon me, it was just beautiful as well. But again, one of those combinations where even now today, depending on who they talk to, what happened, it's just like, really, did Yoko Ono really break up the Beatles, whatever? But with Crosby, Stills and Nash, they go, oh, well, I used to think this and now I don't, and I don't know. I got the idea of
watching. David's kind of fessed up a lot to being a kind of a jerk to people, Lately, he's kind of fessed up. I think David has, but I've seen them play in the 80s, and then I saw him play, probably 10 years or whatever. And they actually opened up for Tom Petty, and both the shows were flawless, years apart. No matter what's going on, Dave had just gotten out of jail. He was bloated. This was back in the 80s. He sounded great. He didn't look very good. I thought he was going to die in front of me when I met him, literally. But nothing stopped that sound of that voice. You'll see in the Get Back documentary, you see Yoko Ono in there, and you actually see Paul and the other guys are a little more all right with Yoko than you'd think. Why she's in there, like the jokes are, why is she sitting there reading a newspaper when all band's there and she's there, and you're like, not necessary.
Well, that's see, shoot me down for being old fashioned, but I don't. Okay, I know it was a personal thing. I know I have lived under the impression until I had my mind changed that she was tolerated because it was almost like, well, if we don't accept her, John's not going to be here.
Right.
And he obviously he was such a, he was a fourth of the puzzle. So,
but more so the way they were getting along in the video, she's actually singing and Paul is playing drums while she's screaming, singing. Like there's moments where you see John Lennon and Paul McCartney just getting crazy and being giggly. It made my heart happy because how things were so weird at the end, so dark. So many good moments of those guys just being children, There's also moments where say, that's when they were starting. John and Yoko were starting to do their dabbling in heroin. So there's some weird picked up on the real happy moments. I was so happy as a band that, they get along. You'll see when you watch it. You're a Beatles fan. You'll like it.
Yeah.
There's 3 episodes. There's 3. 2 of them are out on Disney. Yeah. Check it out.
Oh, I will. It's a big part of my life. I mean, going back to those first impressions. The first time that you hear a sound, it's like the opening chord of Hard Day's Night. I mean, it was like, fuck me. It's like just that bam, and it's a whack, we're into it. It was like, fucking yeah.
Beatles are one of the bands that I love all their phases. They literally have sections of phases. And I like all their phases.
I talked about before about if I want to feel good, I put on, when I say that, I'll clarify that. I put on Mountain to feel good. I mean, I love Leslie West. I've got most of, or whatever's available, I've got it downloaded onto my iPad. I've got probably half a dozen albums, like LPs, and I've got twice as many CDs, all doubling up, but just different formats. But yeah, I mean, there's no, if I want that euphoric, brings me to tears, what was I like at 16 sort of vibe, I put the Beatles on and, Please Please Me and, all that, and two of my favorite albums, and I'm hard pressed to decide between Rubber Soul and Revolver, but the first time that we actually heard, because in comparison, like we're talking about with the Stones before, about how they matured into their own songwriting within the space of a couple of albums, and created some classics, like when the Beatles started to, we realised, this is what they call original material. They weren't covering Dizzy Miss Lizzie or, some of the classic covers that they did on those early albums.
Years.
Yeah, those, and they were, they were great songs. But
once again, it taught them to be good songwriters. I mean, that's what they took from it.
Yeah, they just took it. I mean, there's always been, you can still. I was listening to, Lennon's stuff the other day in my room, and yeah, I mean that heavy 50s influence was always there. The arrangements and the way that the vocal arrangement, but some very, very heavy. I mean, they never really. Neither should they. I mean, their roots are their roots. So I think that'll always come through in the music. It's kind of like someone said to me the other day, as I digress again, what will the next Tats album sound like? And I said, well, regardless of the musical lineup, it'll still sound like the Tats because, that's the way I write. And that's the sort of the lyrics that I come up with and the melodies. And I'll guide as my fifth, of the say. I'll guide how the music sounds to the best of my ability. So it will always sound like the Tats. But I think I did say to this person, I said, look, I think we'll go back. I think we'll it'll be accountable to its roots. I mean, I think because it's arguably, and I think it will be our last album, and so it'll go back to those early, very heavily blues influenced days. It won't be sort of modern, like come out of left centre. I think it'll be fairly predictable. What we're known for, and it's not trading off just what you're known for. It's more about, well, this is where we started. This is where it'll end, sort of thing,
The hidden track will be the sequel to Suddenly.
No. My band, though, is capable of that.
You're capable of it.
Yeah, but well, just saying that we there's a couple of songs that have already emerged, if you like, that they're sounding very, very like original stuff.
I'm excited to hear it.
Very, very early. Yeah, because he's a good writer. But look up Palace of the King, and their stuff's available. But Tim's a very strong songwriter, as apparently there's several, which to a lyricist, a singer, it's a wonderful luxury to have. But apparently apart from Tim, there's two other strong songwriters, contributors in the band.
Wow.
And it's gone from like a 4-piece band, whereas you get a guitar player or two guitar players, bass and drums, or you get one of the guitar players who plays keyboards. Right. And that's the band that I inherited. But now the original guitar player who left the band to start and raise a family has come back. So now there's the opportunity to have three string players, apart from bass and drums. And also the guitar player who plays keyboards would rather play keyboards. He's just a very clever guitar player, mainly a rhythm player. So, pardon me, I said, well, it'll be good to have 3 guitars on stage at one stage. Pardon.
Yeah.
It'll be good to, have a full-time, when you say full-time, someone who's willing to sit behind the keys most of the night, because getting back to that, we're not pressed for time, are we? Not usually.
No.
Cats
would have said an hour. I follow the rules Cat gives me.
Thank you, too. I think. But, getting back to, we mentioned a while ago about Vanilla Fudge, what a great name, and the Young Rascals. And there was a few bands around at that time, English and American,
yeah,
that had the strong keyboard influence. And that's influence, and I've gone back full circle with that with my band, because there's going to be, apart from the odd tune where we're going to need 3 players, like someone playing mandolin or 6 and 12 string guitars, and he'll predominantly be the keyboard player. And it goes back to, and I think that was part of what excited me about those, particularly those 2 American bands. There was a couple of others too. There was I'm just trying to think of the name. The Captain somebody and the Somebodies.
back then.
Yeah.
Like Captain Beefheart type of thing.
Oh no! Oh, Beefheart. Oh God.
Captain. I'm trying to think.
Yeah, they were more sort of like. Do you remember that band? His surname was Pickett, I think. And Union Gap, is that where ring a bell?
Yeah, Union Gap was a band. Yeah. Carrie Pickett. Carrie Pickett, right?
Carrie Pickett. Yeah, that's him.
You should know that. God, it's your name. Got your name all over that.
Yeah, really. Well, before that, there was another band, and they were sort of around, I think, about the same time, maybe a bit after the Fudge and the Rascals. But it was, I thought it was Captain Something and the Somethings, but they were more not your mainstream sort of pop band, more of a fringe. They had a keyboard player in them, so I remember just liking the material. If I want to do another 10, I could easily pick out another 10. Much love, brother. Talk to you then.
Okay.
Talk to you next.